Hello, my name's JD Coffee, and I am about to show you how to build this roughly $2,000 computer. Now, that does not include peripherals or software, however I will be covering software installation and overclocking towards the end of this build guide. Let's get into it. First off, we're going to start here with the Intel Core i7-5820K. It is a 6-core, 12-thread processor that has a 3.3 gigahertz base clock that can boost up to 3.6 gigahertz. However, we will be using this NHD15 by Noctua to cool it down so we can overclock to almost 4.3 to 4.4 gigahertz if we get lucky. I haven't set this up yet, so I'm not too sure what we'll hit, but we'll go for it later. We also have, for case intake and exhaust fans, we have 4 NFA14 fans. For our RAM, we're using 16 gigabytes of Corsair DDR4 2400 megahertz. It's a 4x4 kit because we are in the Intel X99 platform. Speaking of the Intel X99 platform, we have the Asus X99 Pro with USB 3.1. This was not the original motherboard I was planning on picking. It's a little more expensive than my budget would have allowed. However, due to availability issues of the regular non-USB 3.1 version, I had to go with this one. It has all the features that I want, specifically the Asus Wi-Fi Go. I think it's a really cool technology. It also has the overclocking pins, which I'll get into in a little bit, that help stabilize the processor as we're overclocking. Also, we have a GeForce GTX 980 superclocked by EVGA as our graphics card. It should power everything that I need it to and render out videos very, very quickly. Keep in mind that this is a video editing rig. For a standard gaming rig or a standard non-productivity based rig, an Intel 4790K with a Z97 or Z87 motherboard would do perfectly fine with the rest of these components. We also, for storage, we have a 500 gigabyte Samsung 850 EVO. We have a 1 terabyte WD Caviar Black drive, which is going to be used as a scratch disk, more or less. And then we have a 4 terabyte Hitachi NAS series drive. It should be just as quick as I need it to be, but it's going to be for bulk storage of large format video files and audio files. For our power supply, we have the EVGA G2 750 watt Gold Series power supply. It should do well with all of these components, as well as a future upgrade of another 980 when I do deem that necessary. If I deem that necessary, most rigs are going to live their lifetime with only one graphics card. However, if I need to upgrade in the immediate future, another 980 might be a good call. The power supply should support that, as well as the motherboard. Those are the base components. Oh yeah, the case. The case is the Fractal Design Define R5. Initially I had picked the NZXT H440, however, due to some concerns with the build quality on the H440, I decided to go with the Fractal Design Define R5. In particular, I was worried about the side panel window. I'm still in college, so I'm still traveling around quite a bit, and having a side panel window that can get stretched up isn't necessarily something that I look forward to. So I went with the windowless version of the Define R5 because it's not this rig, even though all the components will look good together, it's not meant to be a show-off piece. It's meant to be a workhorse, and that's exactly what it's going to be. So let's get into this build.
The following time-lapse is the build of Avalanche. The overall build took much longer than I thought, so here is a more focused and cut-down version. The major parts are still focused on, however the smaller details will be covered in this voiceover. Anti-static discharge is a main concern while building a computer, especially during this next step. Make sure that you keep a power supply plugged in close to you so that you can discharge any static buildup that might occur. Place the motherboard on top of the motherboard box for a free anti-static workbench. Make sure that you don't place the anti-static bag that the motherboard comes in underneath it, or this could possibly fry your motherboard when you actually put some power through it. First, let's start off with the left-hand side lever. Push down and then push towards the mounting bracket so that it becomes unhinged. Then take the right-hand side and do the same so that the mounting bracket is open. Then take your CPU and notice the little golden triangle on the corner. Make sure that it lines up with the little golden triangle on your motherboard. Then secure the CPU by reversing the exact directions that we just went through to open the CPU mounting bracket. Once you've done this, the black lid that was covering the CPU pins before can come off. Now we start the RAM installation process. Now, due to the fact that we're using quite a large air cooler for the CPU, we need to install the RAM prior to installing the CPU cooler because the CPU cooler will overlap some of the RAM sockets. Because we're using the X99 platform, we're using a quad-channel DDR4 RAM kit. To utilize this quad-channel mode that X99 platform has, we need to make sure that the RAM is installed in the correct slots. In this board's case, the 4 RAM slots that we're going to use are light gray. They are the furthest away from the CPU socket, and they are colored similarly so that installation is an easier process. To begin DIMM installation, push back the tab on the top of each DIMM slot that you plan on using. Then line up the notch that is on the RAM to the little notch that is on the motherboard DIMM slot. This is because each RAM slot is keyed and you don't want to break either the RAM or your motherboard by inserting it incorrectly. You should hear a click when the RAM has been properly installed. This is an X99 series motherboard, so the backplate has already been installed for the next step of our process, the CPU cooler installation. Because the backplate's already been installed, the CPU cooler is fairly straightforward. You screw in 4 little screws on the 4 corners of the CPU. Next, you place 2 little brackets down, one on the top side of the CPU and one on the bottom. After the bracket's been properly aligned, place the 4 nuts on top of the 4 screws that you placed in earlier, and then screw them tight. Make sure that they're very tight so that the CPU cooler doesn't fall off your motherboard. This is the only thing holding it on, and you need to make sure that it's very, very secure. The next step involves thermal compound, otherwise known as thermal paste. Spread about a long grain of rice onto the center of the CPU, using the included tube. Then, place the CPU cooler on top of the CPU so that the thermal compound spreads, covering the entire die area. After this has been completed, secure the CPU cooler using the included screws that are attached permanently to the CPU cooler itself. Due to the structure of my heatsink, I had to remove the included fan so that I could have access to the screws. Now I put both of them back on, and it's time to power this thing on and test to see if all of the components are actually working correctly. Now plug in the 2 included fans into the fan headers on the motherboard. In my case, they were on the top left-hand side of the motherboard. However, your mileage may vary. Then, pull your power supply up onto the table and plug in your 20 plus 4 pin power connector for your motherboard, your 8-pin CPU connector, as well as your dual 6-pin connectors for your GTX 980 graphics card. Begin your graphics card installation by pushing on the tab on the top by 16 PCIe slot of your motherboard. Then insert your graphics card gently so that it snaps into place. Plug in a monitor at this time so that you can see your post reading. Make sure that your power supply is turned on, and then short out the 2 pins for the power on button on your front panel connectors. Some motherboards, like mine in this case, has a power on button on the motherboard itself to remove this step of the process. Once you watch the red LEDs run through their numbers, that shows that your system is trying to post. Check the monitor to make sure that all of your RAM and your CPU has been correctly identified and that all of the other information is correct. This is as far as it will go. Then power off the system, remove the graphics card, and remove each of the power connectors. It's time to put this bad boy into its case. The first step in prepping your case is to take off both side panels and remove the accessory box. The accessory box has all of the little goodies that you need to build your computer inside of that particular case, including power supply screws, standoffs, and other necessities like cable ties. Now it's time to start removing the case fans and replacing them with those Noctua NFA14 140mm pressure optimized fans. These fans are going to be running in a 3 in, 1 out configuration to give me some very good positive air pressure within the case. This will keep dust out for a significant amount of time. Here is a sample installation of the front 2 fans. Keep in note that I have done the same on the bottom and the back fan, except I've used the rubber isolating mounts. These help reduce the overall noise that the fan creates by limiting the vibrations passed from the fan to the case. Now it's time to start the installation of the fun components. Start off by installing the standoffs onto the back of your case so that the motherboard doesn't make direct contact with the case. Take the standoffs and consult the manual of your case to make sure that you're placing them in the right spots. In my case, I'm using an ATX size board, so I'm going to put them in all the spots marked A. Next, install the I/O shield that came with your motherboard. Now that your I/O shield and your standoffs are installed, it's time to put your motherboard in. Grab your motherboard, preferably by the heat sinks to avoid any of that anti-static discharge, and slide it into your case without scraping the back on the standoffs. Line up the I/O shield with the I/O on the motherboard and press the I/O into the I/O shield so that the standoffs line up with the holes on the motherboard. Then, use the screws included with the case to tighten the motherboard down. This is a great time to talk about cable management. Now, this is the first time that we're installing any of the cables into this computer case, so we're going to take the front panel headers and make sure that we route them in the shortest route possible that is going to be least visible towards the end of this build. This includes the USB 3, USB 2, front audio, as well as all of the other front panel connectors. Now it's time to install that big juicy 750 watt power supply from EVGA that we have. First, take it without any of the cords attached and slide it towards the back of your case from the inside and screw it into the back using the included screws, either the ones with your power supply or the ones included with your case. Either will do fine. This is where I start to route all of my power connectors throughout the case. I start off with the 20 plus 4 pin as well as the 8 pin CPU connector. Both of these have fairly standard positions. This 24 pin goes to the right hand side towards the top, and the 8 pin goes just above the CPU on the left hand side of the motherboard, up at the top. Then I also route the 6 pin cables for better cable management later on, so that I know where they are and I know how to route the SATA cables that I'll need for our hard drives. It's time for all of those SATA devices. And by SATA devices, I'm talking about the 5.5 terabytes of storage we're going to put in this. 500 gigabytes is going to be a solid state hard drive that I'm going to put on one of the back sleds. However, the other 5 terabytes are going to be going onto the drive trays that we took out earlier. Now it's time to route the SATA and power cables to those hard drives we just installed. Each device needs its own SATA cable, however SATA power can be chained between the hard drives. We're going to use 2 SATA power and 3 SATA cables total for our drives today. When you're connecting the SATA devices, the hard drives, to your motherboard, make sure that you consult the motherboard manual to make sure that you connect them to the right slots. In this case, the SSD goes on one of the top 2 SATA slots, whereas the hard drives can go on any of them. I left the second SATA slot at the top for a second SSD when I decide to upgrade my system in the future. It's time for the fun part, the graphics card installation, one of the last steps in this computer build guide. For my computer, Avalanche. First, remove the 2 PCIe slot covers from the back of the case. In my case, they're white. Remove them by undoing the thumb screws and pulling them away. Keep the thumb screws handy though, because you'll need them later on in the graphics card installation. Then push down the tab as we did before during the post test. Then insert your graphics card, just like we did before, except this time put the thumb screws in the back where they were initially, so that your graphics card has more rigidity over time. This is one of the few things holding your graphics card in, so you want to make sure that they're pretty snug in there, and your graphics card won't be moving anywhere. Now, I took quite a lot of time on this build, just working on the cable management, and I know quite a few people that can do it much better than I can. However, I wanted this build to turn out to be something that I was proud of, and looking at the final result, I really am proud of all the time that I put into it. Here it is, my computer, Avalanche. It's going to be one heck of a workhorse over the next few years, and I expect that it's going to last quite a long time after that. It's been one heck of a process putting this entire build guide together and editing it, and it's just taken quite a lot longer than I thought it was going to. Figuring out Adobe from the ground up has been quite a long process. However, I've learned quite a bit from it. If you have any questions about this computer build guide or anything else, feel free to contact me at the email you see on the screen now. I'm more than welcome to take any of your questions or even help you build your own computer if you're willing to let me in. So this is my computer build guide, all $2,000 of it, all 3.5 hours of it, complete.